screen. All right, today, last week me and David were talking, and I've been seeking some advice from David, some biblical advice, and he kind of just arbitrarily brought up Jacob and Esau, brothers that fought each other even in the womb. And I've been doing there's a lot of information about this. When I first started, I was thinking, this is a story that I remember from Sunday school, and usually people just concentrate on the fact that the brother tricked the other brother. And I really didn't know much more about it than that. Now, I really think this format of how we're picking a topic and researching it for a week and then talking about it has been really good for me. I've been finding a lot of information that I never would have gotten unless I was really digging deep. Like I said, the Sunday school version of this story doesn't really tell you a whole lot. As you can see, it comes from Genesis 25:27. It's about two brothers, Jacob and Esau. It says, Jacob was a plain man and dwelled in tents, and Esau was a cunning hunter, man of the field. So I'm just going to go over kind of the structure of what all's here before we start talking about it. Here's kind of something that I thought was kind of an overarching kind of theme that I found in my research: God's election and the danger of immediate gratification versus delayed gratification. God already predestined who is going to be stronger out of the twin brothers and who is going to serve who. That word right there, predestined, is something that was coming to me before we even picked the topic. I was actually already Googling predestination and looking up stuff about that. And once David told me, look up Jacob and Esau, I began doing research, and that was almost the first thing that popped out was the word predestination. And there's quite a bit of, you could go a lot of directions in this topic, but if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, this is kind of if you're talking about religious studies and just studying different types of beliefs, it'll lead you to the question, what is Calvinism? And essentially it comes down to this right here. Here's their base doctrine: Lutheranism, Calvinism, Anglicanism. Salvation is achieved through faith, but in Calvinism, they believe that salvation is achieved through predestination. So this goes back to the idea of God's chosen people. Do you really have any choice in the matter? Does God choose people whether they believe in him or not? Is God's people just the Jews? In almost every religion, there's a sect of people or a subsection of people that are allowed in, others aren't. And so it might leave you with a lot of questions about, like, can I achieve salvation through my works? Is the 10 Commandments good enough? Do I just believe in Jesus and I'm good? And so I thought it was important to just kind of point out that this is where all the different denominations start to split from each other. As I go down, you can see this is all in Hebrew. And if you click this button, you can actually hear the whole thing read in Hebrew. One thing that I never got to that I planned on reading more about was Jacob's ladder. And looking at it now, that was something that I planned on looking into that I really never got to. Down below, there's just a little bit of some information about the Torah and some where this book was written. And then down below that, I have a whole bunch of just charts and things that can kind of help you visualize the the different beliefs, predestination, Calvinism, what different people think of. And then down at the bottom, there's some stuff about dizygotic twins. And they were talking about how they rather than being monozygotic, they're dizygotic twins.
So that's it. So there's a scientific explanation there, is what you're saying?
Yeah, there's a lot of science actually involved in a lot of this. There's a lot of genealogy. There's a lot of politics involved in a lot of this. It's much deeper. What I'm trying to say is it's much deeper than just a guy tried to trick his dad.
You can go ask one of the science teachers there where you work, and they'll explain zygotes. Zygotes are part of like something having to do with DNA reproduction.
Right.
Oh.
So here's a little timeline of Jacob's life. He starts off by trading his birthright to Esau, and then Jacob steals Esau's blessing, and then Jacob flees from Esau, and then he dreams of the stairway to heaven. That's the Jacob's ladder. And then he marries Leah, then he marries Rachel. They are sisters. Then his sons are born. He flees from Laban. He's in exile. Then he wrestles with God. Then he reunites with Esau. And then his name is changed to Israel. And then he's devastated by his loss of Joseph. Then he sends his sons to Egypt during the famine. Then he discovers Joseph is still alive. Joseph then sends corn and wheat to Israel so that they can survive the famine. Then they resettle in Egypt, and then Jacob dies. So one of the overarching themes that I've found in this story that was kind of troubling is that Jacob doesn't seem like a particularly good person. He's constantly lying and stealing and doing duplicitous things. And that's where I wanted to kind of start. This is an article I pulled up from the Blessings of Esau, and it says Isaac deliberately is okay. So I don't know if I want to get to this part first, but my conclusion was why did God honor this blessing when it's obtained under such fraudulent circumstances? God works through free choices, both good and bad, human moral agents, and to accomplish his purpose. It says, Isaac deliberately was fighting against the sovereignty of God. At first I was wondering, like, why in the world, if he keeps lying and stealing and all these things, why would God bless him? But the conclusion that I ended up coming to in the end was that there was a prophecy before they were even born. Rachel was told about what was going to happen. It says, or Rebekah, I mean, it says Genesis 25 verses 12 through 34. The promise is given to Rebekah in the oracle before Jacob and Esau were born, that the older was going to serve the younger. In other words, it was promised before Jacob ever was born that he was going to be the one through whom the covenant line of the promise was extended and passed. And so last week we saw Isaac deliberately fighting against the sovereignty of God, deliberately determining that all his might to give the blessing to his favorite son Esau, in spite of the oracle given to Rebekah. Now, their choice of the word oracle here reminds me of Greek myths of the oracle of Delphi. And it is for a Protestant or a Southern Baptist from America, it's probably strange to hear them saying that an oracle's prediction is God's will. Does that reconcile to you, David?
Yeah, it makes me think of like that movie, The 300, where he goes up to the oracles,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
they tell him what he doesn't want to hear.
But
that's what I think
fortune
of.
telling is supposed to be a sin, right?
Right.
So here we have a fortune teller saying something, and you're supposed to take it as God's gospel. So that's a little bit different than we usually think of.
Maybe back then, though, they didn't associate oracles with fortune tellers. Maybe that was more along the lines of like, gypsies or something.
Well, that just, it points to the fact that there are a lot of things that have been covered up by the Catholic Church later on. There was a lot of beliefs in the Old Testament and even in the New Testament that were magical magicians. And
Do you remember when Trump took his first trip and he goes to Saudi Arabia and there's that picture of him like with his hands on that glass ball?
No, I don't remember seeing that.
You remember that? Look it up.
Yeah, I think I remember that.
Yeah.
They're making a big deal out of it.
Well, this red part right here, I think really sums it up. To keep me from just reading all of this, I think this red part really sums it up, that God's grace does not triumph because of us, but in spite of us. And so the reason why God blesses Jacob is not because of anything he did. It's not based on his works, but it was predestined before he was even born. And everyone ends up looking like a fool because they're trying to avoid God's prophecy. The next time you decide you're going to resist the sovereignty of God, you remember the old man Isaac with all of his 5 senses spoiled in front of the majesty and the omnipotence of God. Well, we said that story truly highlights the grace and sovereignty of God. Everybody in the story comes out looking bad. Isaac resists the will of God. Esau is utterly carnal and natural man. Rebekah, though she rightly knows the line of grace is to go through Jacob, resists her husband, usurps his authority, overthrows his dignity, lies along the way in order to establish her own agenda. And Jacob, well, he's the implementer of the deception. And we wondered, Lord, how in the world would you have chosen a man to be the reception of the covenant headship? But is not the whole story of the picture. God's grace does not triumph because of us, but in spite of us. In the next part, this is Genesis 25:29 through 34. Now Jacob cooked some stew. When Esau came in from the open fields, he was famished. So Esau said to Jacob, feed me some of that red stuff. Yes, this red stuff, because I'm starving. This is why he also is called Edom. I thought that was kind of funny because it reminded, eat him some soup.
What do they call that in teaching, where you can remember it by something like that? I can't remember what
I don't know what you call an idiot.
You know what I'm talking about?
A device, yeah.
Yeah, device.
Some kind of device. I don't remember.
Mnemonic device. Yeah.
But Jacob replied, first sell me your birthright. Look, said Esau, I'm about to die. What use is the birthright to me? But Jacob said, swear an oath to me now. So Esau swore an oath to him and sold the birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and lentil stew. Esau ate it and drank and then got up and went out. So Esau despised his birthright. So he's the firstborn. And in the patriarchal system of the Arabs in that area, the firstborn gets double everything. And so that's what he's giving up right there, is his right, because he's the oldest son. But we can find lots of places, even with David had 7 older brothers. There were many instances in the Bible where God goes against the first son's birthright. And so God basically, it shows the sovereignty of God. God doesn't follow any rules, and he will decide who he glorifies and who he blesses. Mom, do you have anything to add to this before I move on? So Jacob does end up making restitution in the end. David was telling me that the two of them got back together at some point, and this is what happens when they get back together. So why did God honor this blessing when it was obtained through such fraudulent circumstances? As I said earlier, God works through free choices, both good and bad, human moral agents to accomplish his purpose. Jacob returns from exile a wealthy man, rich in flocks and herds. He does make some restitution to Esau for the material abundance he stole from him when he took his firstborn blessing. Jacob sends Esau hundreds of goats, sheep, camels, and donkeys. And when they meet in person, he says to him, "Accept the gift I have brought to you." This is literally, "Please accept my blessing that has been brought to you." Jacob is making restitution by providing Esau with a blessing in place of the one he stole. Jacob also bows down to Esau and calls him my Lord, even though Isaac's blessing to Jacob had been, "Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you." These actions on Jacob's part don't undo Esau's surrender of his birthright. That was a permanent transaction between the two of them, even though it wasn't concluded under the best of circumstances. But it does seem that Jacob, now that he is more mature, at least tries to return some of the benefits of his father's blessing to Esau. In this particular part, this is where he wrestles with God. And it's very strange because it just kind of out of nowhere says some guy just shows up, wrestles him all night until morning. When the sun comes up, the guy says, all right, enough, the sun's coming up. And then, but apparently Jacob's hip was dislocated. And still till today, they don't eat the tendons of the hip because of this, because Jacob tore his hip tendon. But the one part that I thought was really strange was that Jacob names the place where he wrestles God Peniel, saying, "I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been delivered." And so I start looking up Peniel. That's the pineal gland is known as the third eye. The Descartes, as you can see in this slide, Descartes, Rene Descartes believed the human pineal gland to be the principal seat of the soul. And if you Google pineal, you'll see that in 1680 in French, it was called like a pine cone, pinus. And they say it's because it was shaped like a pine cone. But when I'm reading this, I'm thinking, okay, obviously the pineal gland got its name from Jacob. It's older. It's obviously it has something to do with it. Surely we didn't name the pineal gland and it not have something to do with Peniel, the town where Jacob wrestled God. But there's no evidence that I can find anywhere that says it has the etymology of Peniel has anything to do with the Bible. And I have a real hard time believing that, because it says that right here, it says amphibians and reptiles. In amphibians and reptiles, it is linked to a light sensing organ known as the parietal gland, which is also called the pineal eye or the third eye. It is the principal seat of the soul. So what this is telling me is that the pineal gland is where you wrestle with God. That there's no way that the word pineal doesn't have anything to do with the pineal gland. That's too big of a coincidence.
Sounds like the word penile to me. I can't help but point that out.
Right. Well, here's the thing is Israel, in the word Israel, which he changed his name to, El refers to this is what they called God then. Before he was Yahweh, he was called El. And so when they say he who wrestles with God, that's what Israel means. El is the same in this word. Penny El. So I'm assuming penny, I couldn't find it, but I'm assuming in Hebrew that means face. It's supposed to mean the face of God. This word is supposed to mean the face of God. So the word God in this word is El. So you got face God.
There's a scene where it's also like speculated to equate with the Eye of Horus and with the pharaohs.
But to me, it almost seems like a cover up that they're trying to say it's because it's shaped like a pine cone and not because of this. I have a really hard time believing that they named that thing because of its shape and not because of this. When it's the same description, wrestling with God, it's the seat of the soul. It's the third eye. It's the thing that makes people have religious experiences. If you look at here, it says that in most of the mammalian brain, the pineal gland is not isolated from the body by the blood-brain barrier system. Capillaries are most permeable to solutes in the blood. So that means alcohol or drugs. It only goes to two places. It's either going to go to your kidneys and get filtered out of your blood, or it can go directly to the center of your brain, where that part of your brain is not part of the blood-brain barrier. So that's why when people are highly intoxicated, they can have religious experiences. And I just have a really hard time believing that this word pineal.
So the pine cone,
with the other word pineal.
The pine cone, that's the seed, right? Of the pine tree. So could it have any reference to like the tree of life or something? I don't know.
Well, it definitely has a lot to do with ancient myths. The Cherokees believed that the pine tree, it's evergreen.
Because the Bible uses the word tree a lot, and sometimes to reference men, I think.
Yeah, but I think with this, a lot of it goes back to the word pineal, as in pineal gland, comes from their description of a pine nut. The gland resembled a pine nut. So that's where they came up with the name.
Okay.
Yeah. Supposedly. But I'm saying in 1608, they were biblical scholars, and there's no way also know the name of the town where Jacob wrestled God. They definitely.
But also, yeah, but there's other writings about how it resembles the Eye of Horus.
Another interesting connection to the pine tree, the Cherokees, it comes from a story called The Pleiades and the Pine. And it has to do with children, 5 children who go up into the stars and create the constellation Pleiades. And the pine tree was created to signify, that's why it's always green, is to signify these children that go up into the Pleiades. If you research the Pleiades with ancient cultures, there's many cultures in Africa and other places that refer to beings that came from the stars and gave us our technology, and they came from the Pleiades.
How do you spell that?
Pleiades, or ES, Pleiades.
Okay.
I think I could pull it up here. It's got an A, EIA. Here is the, oh, look at this. What does that look like?
A cross.
That's exactly right.
Like an angel kind of.
This stuff just keeps getting thicker and thicker.
Well, that one picture down below and to the right of that one, it looks like the same image, but just,
Upside down.
yeah, all those pictures are the same image, just probably taken at different times.
It's the
That or
five. These are the five
whoever.
brothers. In the Cherokee myth, these are the five brothers. It's where the pine tree came from.
What constellation is that?
Pleiades. In Greek mythology, let's see what they say. They're the companions of Artemis, 7 daughters. Atlas was forced to carry the heavens on his shoulders. Orion began to pursue all of the Pleiades. Zeus transformed them into doves, then into stars to comfort their father. The constellation of Orion is said to still pursue them across the night sky.
It says the name Pleiades ostensibly derives from the name of their mother.
But once again, you've got another reference to doves
I
from
know.
a different religion.
That's weird.
Not if you carried over some of the different.
But it also says they went to comfort their father, which is the same in the Cherokee myth. It's hundreds of years old. It's 5 children that are all, it might have been 7 children, are going to up to the Pleiades.
Yeah, that's gonna be a hard one to find there. What you're researching, you never can find.
I've been reading it to my class all week.
Oh, that's in there. I never can find stuff on.
I'll show you where it is. I use a book called James Mooney, Myths of the Cherokee. And there's a PDF. It's over 100 years old, but the PDF's on here for free. So yeah, you can just go to this Gutenberg right here. There we go. And you just go down to the Pleiades and the pine. See, I'll do a search. The Pleiades. Long ago, when the world was new, there were 7 boys who used to spend all their time down by the townhouse playing at the Got the Uchi game, rolling a stone wheel along the ground and sliding a curved stick after it to strike it. Their mothers scolded, but it did no good. So one day they collected some Got the Uchi stones and boiled them in a pot with the corn for dinner. When the boys came home hungry, their mothers dipped out the stones and said, "Since you live like the Got the Uchi better than the cornfield, take the stones now for your dinner." The boys were very angry and went down to the townhouse saying, "As our mother treat us this way, let us go where we shall never trouble them anymore." They began a dance. Some say it was the feather dance, and went around and around the townhouse praying to the spirits to help them. At last, their mothers were afraid something was wrong and went out to look for them. They saw the boys still dancing around the townhouse. And as they watched, they noticed that their feet were off the earth, and with every round, they rose higher and higher in the air. They ran to get their children, but it was too late, for they were already above the roof of the townhouse, all but one, whose mother managed to pull him down with the Gatayuchi pole. But he struck the ground with such force that he sank into it, and the earth closed over him. The other 6 circled higher and higher until they went up to the sky, where we see them now as the Pleiades, which the Cherokee still call Ani Chuja, the boys. The people grieved long after them, but the mother whose boy had gone into the ground came every morning and every evening to cry over the spot until the earth was damp with her tears. At last, a little green shoot sprouted up and grew day by day until it became the tall tree that we now call the pine. The pine is of the same nature as the stars and holds itself the same bright light. So the pine is the same nature as the stars.
Huh.
Pineal gland. I don't know. So this thing that David, I was watching this right before we started. This thing that David shared with us is a bit controversial, and he actually invites you to not watch it. But he's talking about the origin of the word Jew and where it came from and what it means to be anti-Semitic. And David, do you have anything to add about that?
Well,
you got from this?
The reason I put that on there is because I watched it, and something that popped out to me was about Joseph. And you were saying earlier when we talked that you ran into some trouble whenever Joseph came into the picture. So I just want to point out there's 3 verses here that I want to point out. And you can watch it again and see what it says. But if you go to Genesis 3:15. It says, and I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Okay, now go to Revelation 12:1. And these verses are in that video. Revelation 12:1. It says, and there appeared a great wonder in the heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head are a crown of 12 stars. Okay, that's Revelation. And then back to Genesis 37 and verse 9. This is where Joseph, he's dreaming these dreams. And actually, I'm going to read chapter 37, 1 through 13. So it's going to take a second for me to read it. It says, and Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah, and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. And he said unto them, hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose, and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves stood round about, and made obeisance to my sheep. And his brethren said to him, shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams. and for his words. And he dreamed yet another dream, and told it his brethren, and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. Okay, remember, so that 11 stars, remember the in Revelation, she had a crown of 12 stars, right? And so he's saying the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren, and his father rebuked him and said unto him, What is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee, to the earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father observed the saying. And his brethren went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said unto Joseph, Do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send thee unto them. And he said to him, Here am I. So I just wanted to because you were having trouble with Joseph earlier, and that's kind of what I came across just in the hour before this meeting, and wanted to share it. So, and that was from that video.
So here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns that say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. So what I got from Joseph in my studies was that if it wasn't for Joseph, everything bad that happened to Joseph, if it wasn't for all those bad things, getting sold into slavery, his brothers betraying him, all of that is part of God's plan, because Joseph is the one who interprets the dream of the Pharaoh and convinces the Pharaoh that he needs to store his grain. And then a famine comes, saves Egypt, and in return allows Joseph the excess grain to send to Israel and feed them during a famine. So they all would have died if it wasn't for Joseph being a slave and being in Egypt and being able to influence the Pharaoh. And at one point, Jacob himself, as an old man, an old sheep herder, gets to talk to the Pharaoh face to face, and he blesses the Pharaoh, which would be an insult. But because of that, Egypt survives the famine. And they are invited to live in the land of Goshen, and they survive there for a long time, apparently. But my question about that is, at what point are they slaves? Because it seems to me like they're thriving in Egypt. So do they leave and come back? Before
You're talking about the Jews in Egypt?
Yeah, between Joseph, who through my studies of Egyptian history, many people believe that Djoser, which was the first builder of the first stepped pyramid, some people say Djoser was Joseph, and that's his name just translated. But my studies in art history tell me that the first Renaissance man, the first person who was an architect, a poet, all these different disciplines, was a man named Imhotep. If you watch the movie The Mummy, Imhotep is the mummy. He wasn't the pharaoh himself. He was a person who he was the architect of the pyramid, who worked under the pharaoh. That's who Imhotep was. And that's similar to Joseph's position. Joseph's the one that convinced the pharaoh to build a grain silo and to store up all the grain. And they all prospered, and then Joseph became like right-hand man of the pharaoh. And so it's possible that Imhotep is Jake or Joseph.
Well, also, I've read some stuff that through Joseph's dream prophecies about the famines and stuff, he convinced the pharaohs to build those grain silos, and that was how Egypt became an empire. Was because they had all this food stored up. So when all these other leaders and their people were starving, they sold them the grain in exchange basically for their land. And as they bought more land, Egypt or the Pharaoh's reign of territory grew exponentially until they essentially grew into an empire.
I saw one video showing how they filled up. They originally thought these holes in the ground were for water, but they eventually figured out that they filled it up with grain. And there's some kind of way where they could suck it in and out, kind of like we do today with
Conveyors. Yeah.
Well, an Archimedes screw. That's how most of it's done now.
Yeah, it is. So we have this, and then also after that, we if you looked at who possibly could have been Moses, Akhenaten is said to have been the Moses because he converted everyone from a multi-god system to a one-god system and moved the capital and supposedly led an insurrection, and his name's been stricken from the record, which Moses was stricken from the record. So I guess
all
my
that was
question
stricken
would
by
be,
his son.
huh?
All that was stricken by his son, Tutankhamun.
Right. So I'm gonna look up Imhotep and Akhenaten and see how many years are in between those. But let's get back to Jacob and Esau. So my original questions that I was asking at the beginning of the week, that was previous week. Who are the descendants of Esau, and who are the Edomites today? So the descendants of Esau, I looked that up, and it said they're the Edomites because, or they became bond slaves to Israel. So they had to raise wool, and they had to give a wool tribute to Israel. And when I tried to figure out who they were today, they don't seem to have any descendants, because whenever Israel was enslaved by Babylon, I guess they were completely wiped out. So I guess there's not a lineage to look at today for them. I found this passage in Obadiah 1:18, and I think this has to do with something I had listed. Maybe it was last week. I had a passage where it was interpreting it with different versions of the Bible, and boy, they couldn't have been any different. They were more different. It says, "And the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau for stubble, and they shall kindle in them and devour them, and there shall not be any remaining of the house of Esau, for the Lord hath spoken it." And I looked it up, and there is no Edomites. They don't exist. So Obadiah 1:18 came true for sure.
What is that in the Bible?
Yeah. I believe Obadiah is part of the 12 prophets, which is towards the end of the Bible before Malachi.
Okay.
Here's one from Malachi. Malachi 1, 2 through 3 declares, I have loved you, said the Lord, but you asked, have you loved us? Was not Esau Jacob's brother? The Lord says, yet I have loved Jacob, but Esau I have hated, and I have turned his mountains into a wasteland and left his inheritance to the desert jackals. Malachi 1:3 is quoted in Romans 9, 10 through 13. Not only that, but Rebekah's children had one and the same father, our father Isaac. Yet before the twins were born or had done anything good or bad, in order that God's purpose in election might stand, not by works, but by him who calls, she was told. The older will serve the younger, just as it is written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. Why did God love Jacob and hate Esau? If God is love, how could he hate anyone? And the best explanation I got for that was to prove his own sovereignty, to prove that you can't earn it. You can't tell him, I've done good. But at the same time, Jacob wrestles with the guy to the point where he dislocates his hip. I other than the fact that he dislocated his hip, I would think that it meant mental wrestling. Like he struggled until his pineal gland opened up, something like that. But then it says he actually physically tore his tendon in his hip. Some people say that the person he wrestled with was an angel. And I don't see any evidence of why they should think that in the Bible. It says it's just some guy just shows up and he wrestles with him till morning. And he says he names the place because he wrestled with God. So I believe that at least Jacob believed that he was wrestling with God. But there are a lot of preachers that I've seen that will say that it was an angel, which to me is strange that you would deny that God could come to earth. I guess their issue is that he only came once. And I did, in that same video you were just showing me, one of the first things that stood out to me was like the very first thing they play is talking about how only one person ever saw the face of God, and it was Jesus. But what about Peniel?
Weren't they in the dark? Wasn't it dark though? Where does it? Didn't he come to him at night?
Yes, and they wrestled till morning.
Maybe you didn't see him very well. I don't know.
Well, this says that, when you just Google it, Jacob wrestling with the angel is described in Genesis. The angel in question is referred to as a man and God in Genesis. I mean, he could have come down as in disguise. While Hosea references an angel. So that may be where the angel part comes in. Hosea, however you pronounce that.
This is where interpretations make it fuzzy too,
In the New Testament, Esau's choice to sell his birthright is used as an example of ungodliness. A godless person who will put physical desires over spiritual blessings. By his negative example, Esau teaches us to hold fast to what is truly important, even if it means denying the appetites of the flesh. Both Old and New Testaments use the story of Jacob and Esau to illustrate God's calling and election. God chose the younger Jacob to carry the Abrahamic covenant, while Esau was providentially excluded from the messianic line. And also, I thought it was interesting, the dichotomy between hunting and farming. The fact that a hunter is going to go out and get whatever he sees and just get whatever comes to him, but a farmer has to plant ahead and wait for the harvest. And I think it may, like we talked about last week, it may have been another allusion to the harvest, a metaphor for what God wants us to know about his plan. We talked last week about how the lamb was a metaphor throughout the Old Testament before Jesus ever came. And it's possible that this is just one more example of them leading us to the metaphor of harvesting the souls. Possibly.
Yeah.
Here's one thing I wrote down to bring up, kind of an essential question. What do you believe? Every man that rejects God's blessing does it to himself, or God's glory is the goal of all things, and his freedom and his sovereignty are essential to his deity. So basically, I mean, I guess you kind of have to believe both, but can you even earn God's favor? Can you force God, or are you predestined? Like, did I even choose to create this church, or was it inevitable and I couldn't fight against it?
Yeah, and that's the hard part when you look at the testament of Jesus Christ.
I would say I did not choose to make this church.
Yeah.
I'm saying I'm powerless to, because I mean, it's just happening.
Hey, I was reading this little thing. I just found talking about Jacob and who he wrestled. And it says in this one little paragraph, despite having a dislocated hip, Jacob doesn't give up and continues to wrestle with the very person he wanted a blessing from. Jacob is determined not to let go of the man. He openly admits his name is Jacob, which means deceiver. And because he wouldn't give up his name, it should be a comma there, his name was changed to Israel, which means he struggles with God. So is that a literal translation, mean that the man he wrestled with was God? Or
Himself. He's wrestling with his own mind, and he never gave up. I don't know. He was in fear. He was in complete fear at this time because he thought his brother was coming to murder. And then he overcame through this wrestling match because he would not give up, and he wouldn't give up until God gave him a blessing. And then there was peace after that.
Or is it a metaphor, more or less, which means he was such a stubborn guy and wouldn't get up, fought through the pain, that they gave him a new name? I don't know. I just saw that, thought it was interesting.
Yeah, maybe he's too stubborn.
I remember reading that he tells him, even after God says he's going to bless him, he didn't take the blessing right away. He's a true jerk. He says, if I cross and go back to where I came from and everything's all right, then I'll make you my God.
Huh.
So he's like the worst person in the Bible. like as far as I'm concerned. Because even like his dad, he like even with the sheep, he was supposed to own. His dad made a pact with the guy that he was working for. Hey, look, if you'll let me go back to where I came from and stop making me your slave, I will I will just take some payment, but I'll continue to raise your sheep for you. And so what he did is he said, look, if you'll give me all the bad sheep, you give me all the speckled ones and the black ones, you keep all the pure white ones, I will continue to raise all your sheep, and my word is good, and you know my word is good. And so you'll always know that all your sheep are the white ones and mine are all the spotted ones and striped ones and stuff. And what does Jacob do? He goes and gets a stick with some mud or bark or something, and he puts spots on all the white sheep so that they'll breed with his. He never did anything right.
I've thought the same thing.
He did not deserve it. He did not.
I've been in arguments over this topic, and I would say the same thing, yeah, about that. You know, trying to understand it. Now I have a more complete, full understanding from the message that you got out of the story.
I wanted to read a few things about Reformed theology. And this is a whole religion that's kind of been based on this topic. Isaiah 48, 9 through 11 says, for my name's sake, I defer my anger. For the sake of my praise, God says, I restrain it for you, that I may not cut you off. Behold, I have refined you, but not as silver. I have tried you in the furnace of affliction. For my own sake I do it. For how should my name be profaned? My glory I will not give to another. So that's about his mercy. He's not blessing us for our own sake. He's doing it for himself, for his own glory. Psalms 115:3. Our God in the heavens, he does all that he pleases, totally free. Romans 9:15. I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on who I have compassion. So you can't really say, this person's been so good, they deserve it. Or this person's been so bad, they deserve it. It doesn't work that way. It's not just automatic. If you do good, then good things happen. That is not biblical. Isaiah 46, 9 through 10. I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times, things not yet done, saying, and here it comes. My counsels shall stand, and I will accomplish all my purpose. So he gave a thief and a liar his blessing because he knew that his son Jacob would save everyone and create many nations who would glorify God, based on the fact that they received the blessing, even though Jacob never deserved it. And really, that's the story of the Jews in general, because they continually went against God's blessing, even with Moses, they were given the 10 Commandments, and they made a bull, a golden bull, a golden calf. And that's why Moses broke the 10 Commandments. That's why he was so mad, is because they didn't listen to anything he said.
And they still got to go to the promised land, and he didn't.
So the main thing one of the things that's on my mind is, you can't go worshiping God and expect him just to bless you because you worshiped him. It doesn't work that way. And you have to persevere through the times when God's not blessing you. And one thing my dad always said was, this book is not for us, it's written for the Jews. The Jews are God's people. And that's one thing you run into with Calvinism. When you look at Calvinism, some people believe that you can't. So the question is, I guess, is the message just for the Jews? Do the Gentiles get to partake in this, in God's blessing? Because there's several passages that also say that I will not forsake my people. And so a lot of people believe that once the Christians started worshiping Jesus, that they're like a part of God's people now. But everything we see here in the Old Testament, everything has to do with lineage, and the other people are cut off. And so the question is, just if you're a Gentile who believes in Jesus, are you now one of God's people? Or will he forsake God's people? Because there's a lot of Jews that don't believe.
It says in the New Testament we can be adopted. It's like we're adopted. So yeah, I think so.
Okay. Did they go off, or why is it quiet?
Does anybody have any? Oh, let's look at some of these memes real quick. I put these on here just to kind of keep things a little bit more lighthearted.
I just noticed those when you started the thing, and I was laughing.
Well, I have captions underneath to kind of show what I was thinking. So Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of red stew. It says, "Hey Jacob, can I have some food?" And he said, "Sure, only if you give your birthright." And you got Ron Burgundy here. Well, that escalated quickly. I thought that was pretty funny because I was thinking the same thing. Like the guy is like, "I'm starving to death." He's like, "Well, you could just give me everything that you'll ever be owed." And he's just like, "Anything, I'm starving." Yeah, that was pretty shystery right there right off the bat. And then you have this one underneath that says, "Promise given not for works, but for sovereign grace." And it says, "As it is written, Jacob I have loved, and Esau I hated." Romans 9:13. And then you got this is the what's his name, McMahon from wrestling. He's the guy that runs pro wrestling. He says, "What shall we say then? Is there injustice on God's part? By no means. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on who I have compassion." And then you got the next line here. It says, "So then it depends not on human will or exertion, but on God, who has mercy. For the scripture says to Pharaoh, for this purpose I have raised you up, that I might show my power in you, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth." So what we're saying is he did all this to save the Pharaoh. That he glorified the Pharaoh. Egypt would have fell if it wasn't for the famine. I mean, that being thwarted because they saved all this grain. So he saved the greatest empire on the earth with a bunch of shepherds, sheep herders. So then he has mercy on whom he wills, and he hardens whomever he wills. So it's not through good works that God blesses us necessarily, which is the opposite of what you hear in a lot of churches. I don't always wrestle with God, but when I do, He changes my name to Jacob from Jacob to Israel, and the descendants of my 12 sons by my 2 wives and their servants grow to become the 12 tribes of Israel. And then you have here this little, it starts out, Joseph starts out in slavery and ends up, runs all of Egypt. Jacob learns that Joseph is still alive and with God's blessing goes to Egypt. With the famine increasing, Joseph designs a plan for the Egyptians to trade their livestock and land for food. The Israelites thrive in Egypt's land of Goshen. Which is where in Moses' time, according to the Ten Commandments movie, that's where the slaves are enslaved, or the Jews are enslaved, is in the land of Goshen. But my question is, were they slaves at all? A lot of archaeological evidence shows that they weren't slaves. Mom, are you talking? You gotta unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, but the slaves, they were slaves and they were building all the things that Ramesses and, Pharaoh wanted.
I think they were bond slaves, though. There's a difference between slaves like we think of them now and bond slaves. Like Esau's people were bond slaves to Jacob's people. So I think everyone was slaves to each other. They're paying tribute. They're doing certain thing every month in order to support the whole system. And I think that's different than how we think of slavery today. They were allowed to live separately. They were just obligated to do certain things. So they're obligated to raise sheep and trade it for food.
Well, I mean, they got beat if they didn't go to work.
Yeah,
You
because that's why Moses had to, or that's why he did kill the one foreman, I guess,
Right.
for lack of a better word.
Killed that soldier because he had, hurt that other guy. And that was his people. And of course, I don't know the revelation of when Moses actually figured all this out. But, they, you shouldn't take things from a visual movie because that's the way it is. But, there was the movie that I saw showed whoever that is, one of the Israelites recognized Joseph as Moses as who he was. You're the one that's going to lead us out of here. And so when and he's in charge and he's talking directly to God, and God tells him, put all these plagues on him and warning, this is going to happen. And he keeps saying, let my people go. So to me, I don't know about bond or whatever. I know they did have to, they live separately. I think the Egyptians frowned upon, sheep herders and stuff like that, even though they ate it, I guess, but they were beneath them.
And wasn't there something about they were complaining, so he was going to make them do more with less? Like they had to start building their blocks or whatever. Maybe that was a different story or something, but
Yeah, they had to build their bricks with something without mud or something.
yeah.
So it appears to me that Moses is our topic for next week.
Okay. And
Is there a specific area, or you want to just try to see where we can get with the whole deal?
Mom, do you have a suggestion of what part of Moses we could look into?
well, you know that Moses was the baby put in the creek and was picked up by the Egyptian lady because they were killing all those babies, under 2 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was saved. Now, this is what is so omni awesome about God, is because he knew that baby as it was formed in the belly. And so he knew what greatness this little baby was going to be. And I just, that just
another predestination.
right. So because so many of our great people in the Bible, Noah and all of them, they had flaws, big flaws. And he turned all that around because he really knew their heart. But I would say, how Moses started telling God, no, not me, don't choose me, choose this other person, choose my brother because he's a better speaker than me. We could break this up because you all bring up so many good things that we can't get through it in a 45-minute deal. But I think we ought to start when God first comes to Moses and puts this on him. And even when he struggles, when he, just like what David said, when he slayed the soldier, the Egyptian, and got in trouble, and then he was banished and it was for quite some time. How would we be today if we were banished, and you walk for days before you find anybody that might give you a piece of meat? How do we, follow through with God's request of us?
I think what I'm going to do on this topic, Kit, is I'm going to look into the women that were influential in Moses' life, and the reason is going back to where I pointed out that Mary Magdalene, when she'd washed Jesus' feet, he said that she also needs to be included in the gospel as a remembrance to her. So I don't know. So I want to not just focus on Moses, but also and then we talked about today about enmity between Adam and Eve. And I don't know, maybe there's something there. I think I'm going to make that kind of my focal area.
I'm going to look into modern, I'm going to look into the Egyptian connections to Jerusalem, and look into Imhotep and Akhenaten and see what kind of connections I can make between those people. See if there are any legitimate connections. I've seen it. I've thought about it myself for years, but I haven't gone super in depth into seeing what other people say. I'd like to know what Catholic preachers would say about that, and what rabbis are saying about it.
Okay.
Robert, are you talking?
Yeah, sorry. I was talking to Tiffany too, and I forgot I had muted mine. But you look up maybe some references in the Torah. Not the Torah, but the Quran.
And maybe I have heard that there was one of Akhenaten's temples was recently excavated, and it supposedly has stuff about Jews, supposedly.
So you're gonna dig into the Quran, Robert?
Well, I was just mentioning the kid about all the different references, like he was talking about with Moses and the Egyptian contacts. If there'd be any different references in the Quran to him, that would be different than biblical.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. One of the things that I was watching this week was talking about, so Obama went over there and talked to the Prime Minister of Saudi Arabia, and he talked about how they were we're all the sons of Abraham, and we should believe as Abraham did. And everyone applauded that. Everybody, yeah. But the problem is, in America, we think, this father of many nations, it's all about peace. But the problem is, in Saudi Arabia, they've read the Quran, and obviously Obama hasn't, because it says that Abraham's beliefs are that he basically hated everyone that wasn't in his family, and that we should continue to hate each other for eternity.
Well,
and they're just like, yeah, yes, you're right. We hate you, and we should continue hating each other.
well, they just had the Abraham Accords, which was
Right.
somewhat of a peace treaty, you know.
But
that
but that's not what the problem is. None of us
Yeah.
have read the Quran. If we actually read the Quran, we would know that Abraham hates everybody, and like if you're not in his clan, he don't want nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
And so we say things, but we have no idea what they think about it. And so whenever we, like, for instance, Jesus, they do believe in Jesus, but they believe that the true Jesus and the true teachings of Jesus is the teachings of Islam, and that the Romans hijacked the whole thing, and that nothing that Christians believe in is even what Jesus taught. So to them, we're all morons. Which may be true. I don't know. We'll have to look it up. But I do think
Not
knowing
true.
what's in the Quran,
Not
like
true,
I've
not
had a lot
true.
of people tell me it's sacrilegious to read books from other religions, but I have said since I was 12. Robert can attest to this. I told that preacher whenever we were kids, knowledge is power, and if everyone has power and we don't, then we're gonna lose.
That's right.
Well, it's kind of like you go back to medieval times, and the only literature you were allowed to read, if you were even allowed to learn how to read, was the Bible.
Right.
But then you go to you're having a debate against some Satan worshiper on the bus, and he knows everything about everything, and you don't have a clue what he's even talking about.
Yeah.
That's the same problem we're having with Islam. They've all read the Bible, and another problem is a lot of them haven't read the Bible, so they don't know what we think either.
Right.
I've always
Alright.
steered away from other religious texts, but maybe if Robert can find something, it'd be beneficial to me. I don't know.
All right, so let's just make the topic Moses, and we'll see where it takes us.
Okay.
So again, let me remind you of where the notes page is, so everybody can contribute to the conversation ahead of time. So I jumped in and I just kind of did a little research here and there throughout the week as it came to me, as God revealed it to me. And so this is in Google Drive. This is a slideshow, and you can just right click on it and duplicate these. And let's see, I'll just take one and I'll just delete all the text off of it, and I'll delete the presenter part, and I'll delete the date. And anybody that wants to put a note in here can just copy this page, write their name right there, write the date, and put whatever you want right here, and we'll all see it. That way we can share our notes as we're coming up with what we're going to talk about.
Okay.
And I'll go ahead and share that. I think I've already given it to Robert and David. Mom, what email address do you want me to use?
JanCoffrin@yahoo.com.
One thing I also want to start working on, I posted an invite to the story on Facebook. So let's try to see if we can expand the number of people that are in here.
Did you record today?
Yep. All
I
this
think
is being recorded right now.
I think you should find a way to put it out there somehow.
Well, it is out there. It's on the website.
Yeah, okay.
I think I put it in the slideshow last time. No, I didn't. If you go to the welcome, what we did, let's see, where is it? Ministry. Wrong. I'm in the OK Native. Right here, down right on the welcome screen on the front page, you scroll down, it says video archive. You can scan that with your phone and you can watch what me and David talked about last week.
Do you need an app for that to scan it, or how does that work?
You just use your phone and just point it at it, and it'll give you a website link.
Oh, okay.
And so I will, I don't know if it will be the same as that, but I will have a video right here of what we talked about today.
Sweet.
Okay.
If you guys have any more suggestions to make the website more accessible to people, if you get confused about anything or you want me to rearrange anything, let me know.
Are you putting this stuff on Facebook too?
I haven't yet. I had some
think you
computer problems. My hard drive burned up, and I may have lost all my work from the last 3 years. But I'm getting a new hard drive, and I'm using my desktop right now.
It might be good just to, keep the videos on the Facebook group too.
Yeah, I'll put them on there.
Huh?
Yeah, I'll put them on there.
Have you invited Gary?
Yeah, we've invited Gary a few times. I'm not
Okay.
sure what he's. I think I don't know if we got too biblical on him or what. He was really interested the first couple of times we talked to him.
Well, it could be time too. 12 o'clock might not be the time that he can do it.
And he's been having to get up real early to drive all the way to Tulsa to work, so he may just be wanting to sleep in too.
Yeah. No problem.
He'll come around. Give him
Yeah.
time.
I think it's good for us to start out small. I mean, if we're going to expand this and make more of it, I think it's good for us to work out all the kinks before we have a bunch of people on here.
I do too.
I think it's fine for you to work through it and people just to see how it's improving. I mean,
Right.
At what point are you going to open the veil, or raise the curtains on, on the truth?
Yeah, I had a lot of people. I haven't looked at it lately, but we had quite a few people click on once I put it on the Facebook story, a lot of people were clicking on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I think you're doing a good job as it is, and I don't think you should be afraid to let people see, flaws in the way that you've got it set up. And you're just got to make constant improvements.
For some reason Facebook won't even open.
We'll know if a bunch of preachers start getting on there and condemning us.
I'm hoping they'll come on and
we'll be doing
maybe
something
answer
right.
some questions that we have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or we might be doing, if we start making them all really mad, we might know we're doing something right.
Right. Yeah, that's like we said last week. Oftentimes in the Bible, the people that present themselves as most religious are the ones God really condemns.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
And as we can see with this week, the people he blesses don't necessarily deserve the blessing at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's a really humbling thing for us all to keep in mind that no matter how good we're doing, we all are going to fall short of the glory of God.
Oh yeah.
Even with our best efforts.
True.
Which I guess to some people would be discouraging, but I guess, I mean, I feel like Jacob a lot because I feel like I'm wrestling.
I think this was a good lesson, but you're not going to knock it out of the park every time, I mean, you're going to have things that interrupt your ability to conduct research and prepare, and you just got to have faith, Don't be afraid.
I think it was a really successful from where we started because Jacob and Esau, the story I remember from a kid was just of him tricking his dad into thinking he's got hair on his arm. And I think we went way past that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel like I know the story of Jacob and Esau 100-fold better than I did when David first brought it up last week. And that's what we're doing. We're just, like I put it on Facebook. When I put it on Facebook, I said, it's a journey. Come join us for a journey through the Bible. And, nobody here is pretending to know any of the answers or to have an absolute answer to anything. We didn't intend that to be the purpose when we started. And so
Well, what I know is that we've got some young people here that's searching for answers and not condemning or being confrontational. You're simply reading the word of God. And other than that, I think that's what God is going to bless us about. You're reading his word.
And
And the more,
I don't
the more
think
questions, the more questions that people ask, and especially when you can see that they don't understand what they're talking about, the better you're going to get at being able to teach the people.
Yeah.
true.
I always like this this deal we're doing. It's kind of like remember the old radio guy who used to come on
The rest
Paul
of the
Harvey?
story.
Yeah, this to me is more like the rest of the story.
I was thinking that last week too. I was thinking the same thing, because we've all heard pieces of this stuff, but
Yeah.
but to know what is, if I went to a seminary college, what kind of things might we talk about? What are the ranges of beliefs that other people have? Which is something you don't ever really get to talk about. You don't, in church, they want you to believe just their doctrine, and you don't really get to talk about the spectrum of other doctrines. It's kind of like, here's the choices in what you can believe in. Where do you find yourself on that?
Well, it's also like if you sit in a church with 30 other people that have been going to that same church for the last 10, 20 years, if you get to talking to people, you're going to find out that not everybody actually has the same understandings or interpretations and beliefs.
Yeah.
They're all going to take their own little bits out of it.
Yeah.
And I've had people that talk about other churches badly, that they say, oh, this church, they don't read straight from the Bible. They have just feel good messages. And at COS, when I leave there every week, I usually feel pretty good about myself, and I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily.
Oh.
And then when I go to, let's say, Light Harbor Church, or whatever, the one that's next to the Grand Savings Bank, they say that they're very biblical, and they pride themselves on being biblical, but guess what? They're also boring as possible.
Yeah.
Which makes you not want to go there.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important for us all to be able to just talk candidly and not have any pressure. It's not really up to me what you believe, and I shouldn't. I don't know. A lot of people feel guilty if they don't convince you to think the way they do, that you're going to go to hell, and that they're responsible because you went to hell. And that's not necessarily the message I'm getting from what I'm reading in the Bible.
Yeah.
I mean, if Jacob and Esau is a perfect example. It doesn't really matter what you do. If God isn't going to bless you, he's not going to bless you. No matter what you try to do, you can't force God to let you in. Period.
Well, we've been dwelling on the Old Testament because it's our history. So it's very good to dig around and understand that, and that's what's so puzzling is we have these why questions. Well, negate all that. We are all believers of Jesus Christ as the Son of God, and he died for our sins. That's the main focus, at the end of the day.
Right.
That's what's going to get you to heaven, is that Jesus gave his blood, suffered mightily for us. And in that way, that's what we got to remember. But I am very intrigued on the Old Testament and listening to you guys, because you bring up stuff I've never even thought about. And because of my hopping around in different churches all my life until I was an adult, and the Baptist belief more than what was brought me closer, because I was Methodist, and I never really remember hearing that much about Jesus as our Savior. I'm sure it was taught. I just didn't hear it. So
But I want to ask you a question, Kit. And this just came to me, but do you think there's ever going to be a point where you're going to baptize people?
I have done an exorcism type of thing before, and I do believe in the magic. I do believe in the power, like the biblical Old Testament power. I do believe that, but I don't feel like I'm there. I'm not ready yet. A lot of people in the Bible felt like they weren't ready. I feel like I have the gift to do something like that.
Okay, I was just wondering. I didn't know if you'd thought about it yet.
I have thought about it.
well, let me ask you this. John the Baptist, what was he really? Were they ordained back in those days or what?
I think my gift, well, he was an Essene,
So
part of a cult.
Kit's got that certificate thing to make him where he can marry people. Okay. But to be an ordained minister to baptize people.
John the Baptist was Jesus' cousin.
Yes, I know that. You know, he baptized all these people. So what credentials did he have? I mean, do we know have to have credentials, or were you just a believer, or what? You know, I don't know.
That's a good question.
I'm gonna write that down.
Another thing, because Kit would have to be, I mean, from what I understand from the Baptist deal, most preachers, the younger ones, definitely went to a school, a theology school, like a seminary. And
I've been seeing them online. I've been seeing that there's online ones, and I've been considering. It's kind of been in the back of my head for the last 2 weeks about possibly going to some kind of seminary school.
Because I bet you there's lots of people, you know, Kit, that claim to be Christians and they've never been baptized, and maybe you could provide them that opportunity. I don't know.
Right. Well, baptism is just the showing of it to other people that you are a believer.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't save you. It's what you do before you get baptized, being saved and then baptized.
Right.
But I know people, even myself, that have been baptized more than once.
Well, then we go back to what David was talking about last week, and the difference between being baptized with water and baptized in the Holy Spirit.
Well, that goes back to, you know, like Catholicism and I think Lutherans, you know, they baptize the baby.
Yeah, they Christian the baby.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I believe is like we dedicated Cody and Kit, who we dedicated him as back to God, lead them in a godly life. And the one that ministered over us with that was, Cody was we were in another church in Oklahoma City, and we got in Christian there, but Kit's grandpa led over his, the one that died. So Curtis Sr.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
It's just a blessing, you know. Give your child back to God and tell him you're going to dedicate your life to raising that child in a Christian home. That's all it is, really.
A lot of the Jewish traditions are deeply psychological in how they constantly remind them of their past and what the promises are and things like that. Like, for instance, the Passover, the 7 candles of the candelabra are about the time they tried to cleanse the Roman emperor brought in a pig into the holiest of holies, into the temple, and sacrificed a pig in there. And it took them, I want to say, 7 days to clean the temple so that it was holy again. And that's what the candelabra is about, with the 7 candles on it. And there's so much ritual in what they do to kind of to reinforce what they want you to know without you really noticing it. And I think that there's a lot of religion that I have steered away from, just because it may not necessarily be 100% like what God wants. I don't know. It's like I would maybe, even if I believe that baptism's not going to save you, would I continue baptizing people? But the real important part might be the psychology in your own mind. Like one thing, like something that it's hidden, that's similar to this is in Japanese tea houses, the doors are very, very small. And when people leave, like if a samurai was to leave one of these tea houses, he would have to get down small and squeeze through this door. And the idea is it is the way they explain it is baptism, because they are being reborn through their mother's cervix into the world. So every time they leave the tea house, they are reborn into the world anew. And it's the same with igloos and with teepees. Same thing. Whenever they're in their mother's womb, when they're in the home, and when they leave, they're being rebirthed back out into the world. And that they need to realize that they have a new chance to start over.
Well, that's weird. What if you leave the house 10 times a day?
Well, you better go through that small door so you can be reminded that you're not all powerful.
What if you leave out the back door?
They don't have back doors in teepees or igloos.
Go up where the smoke goes out.
Right.
Have
Santa Claus then. All right. Well, I think it's 1:46. We went on for an hour and 45 minutes. Even though I don't really feel like I necessarily hit exactly what, let's just review real quick on Jacob and Esau, some of the main points. Immediate gratification versus delayed gratification. Some of the things that I was highlighting in here is important. God's grace does not triumph because of us, but in spite of us. And
right.
So God was not, he was not rewarding Jacob for something he did. He was making everybody look like a fool because they were not heeding the prophecy given to Rebekah. He told them from the beginning what was going to happen, and everything after that was just a struggle to avoid it. I mean, he said from the beginning, the oracle before Jacob and Esau were born, that the older was going to serve the younger. They said it. Jacob said it. Same thing with Joseph. He had a vision. He said it. No one believed it. And that's the problem, is everyone looked like a fool because they could not believe what God told them, which is the exact opposite of Abraham. Abraham is making a sacrifice of his son Isaac on the altar, and he's going to do it. Abraham's about to do it, and a lamb appears. He was rewarded because he believed what God told him. And this story is exactly the opposite of the one we read last week. This is Isaac. Even though his father had all that faith, Isaac didn't have the same faith. And he wanted his oldest son to have the blessing. But God had to prove to Isaac that his will was not supreme, that God was more powerful than Isaac.
And that seems to be a lesson that Jacob learned from that situation later, when his own son Joseph was coming to him with prophecy.
So what this is saying is we have to pass the tradition of faith down to the next generation, because it might not even be them who's blessed, but our grandchildren will be blessed.
Yeah.
All right. Well, next week, there'll be a page right here in about 10 minutes that'll say Moses. And I'm going to start posting stuff on there. And there will be a video on the welcome page of everything we just talked about if you want to review it or if you want to send it to someone else or give someone an idea of what this is like so they can come next week.
Okay. Did you talk to David about moving?
Yes, my spring break is around the 14th, 15th. And Mom's gonna get a U-Haul and we're just gonna load her stuff. She lives here in Grove now, over by the high school. So
I'll be ready.
We're gonna take the U-Haul and just drop the stuff off over here by the high school.
Well, we'll have to come all the way out to Adair. I mean, I'm still
Well,
living in Adair
Right,
right
we'll
now.
go get it in Adair, but we're just bringing it here to Grove.
I'll be ready.
All right. We'll get back in touch with you.
Love you guys.
Thank
Good
you.
job.
Love you.
Good
Go
job.
and-
kid.
You too,
Yeah.
David.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you, Robert.
Yeah.